I recently fell down a rabbit hole of military recruiters, military wives, and military hustlers. And when I say fell down, I mean more I jumped down because I wanted a closer look into the largest terrorist organization the world has ever seen in the US Department of Defense. And in my responses condemning their grooming of children in high school, normalization of the extreme harm they commit daily, and rewriting of history to glorify war criminals, I kept hearing similar responses. And so this video is a response to those responses. So first of all, I'll make, though incompletely for lack of time, the pretty clear argument that the US military ought to be hated, and then go into why we should do that hating performatively and openly. First, in response to the people who were defending the US military, whether those are military wives, whether those are actual people in the military, or just people we call euphemistically veterans. And then to the things we gain from doing so, not just why they're wrong, but why we ought to do the things that we're so right about. Here are some of the things I saw.
3 things you should do before you ship out to Navy boot camp. Because that dragon lady, she don't play.
I'm not gonna lie, the military life is honestly pretty good.
Send this video to an unemployed cutie patootie. You're so cute, but you're broke, and that's a problem. See, you would be my type if you had a job. And that's why I sent you this video, because I'm putting you in touch with a Navy recruiter.
So first of all, why do I hate the US military? Because the US military and its proxies have been the most lethal entity that the world has seen in the past 70 years, if not ever. With just retributive attacks for 9/11, having direct deaths of almost 1 million people, with indirect deaths bringing the total to almost 5 million. Not a single one of these invasions was justified, insofar as any action of a genocidal empire could be justified, and every single one of them was criminal, with the think tank estimating between 7 and 13 million direct deaths in US-supported armed conflicts, and US-instigated armed conflicts adding 6 to 10 million more deaths. But these numbers are way too big, really, for anyone to fathom, and before anyone can comment, if we use the methodology of the Fascist Victims of Communism Fund, this number would be like 100 quadrillion, because they were just straight up making shit up. So no, I don't want to hear whataboutisms, but what's really significant here is not the number. We could debate till, the crows come home, how many people have actually been victims of America, how many victims of other countries, but because one criminal death is just as significant as another. But what's important is that this is the function of the US military, to protect capital abroad through violence and occupation, still occupying a majority of the countries in the world, and the arms of the US state being as expansive as any state apparatus the world has ever seen. This level of control, carnage, and harm should be condemned. This is an exploration not of whether it ought to be condemned, but why this obvious threat, right, this obvious conclusion isn't taken as such. Why do Americans have such a difficulty recognizing the harm of their own military, and especially, why do people that claim to be progressive, why do people that even claim to be anti-imperial still do legwork for the American empire and its proxies? And the basic conclusion, to ruin it all, is that Americans identify with the criminals more than their victims. And if you humanize those in the global south, the primary victims of US imperialism, even vaguely, as much as you humanize the people that are doing the violence against them, then this worldview has absolutely no ability to maintain itself. And if you use the language that to talk about the US military, even domestically, that the US State Department uses to talk about other military apparatuses, then the worldview falls apart, right? If I refer to them recruiting in high school as recruiting child soldiers, which is what it's doing, right? If I refer to them as terrorists, there's really no way to logically, coherently deny that other than just appealing to what the US says. So I want to get into the actual discussions I've had and the actual points that I think boil down to, but are not limited to the above points, about exactly why seemingly progressives are so scared of the concept of calling a spade and a soldier in the US military a war criminal. The first and largest one is, but Will, have you heard of the poverty draft? You don't understand. You gotta be nice to the war criminals. Whenever I do anti-US military propaganda, I inevitably get the well-meaning, and sometimes not well-meaning, response from a veteran, a military wife, or even a self-apologetic current military member that goes something like this. I agree the US military is bad. They might go so far as to recognize it as a war criminal or terrorist army, but the people in it are not the thing itself. And in fact, many of them are victims of the exact propaganda you're talking about. So why are you attacking them? Don't you understand? They only joined because they wanted education. And if you are talking about the propaganda towards it, they're a victim of the propaganda. Actually, yeah. Many of them are not only victims of the propaganda, but are particularly so because of the targeting of impoverished and lower-class schools to recruit from. And there is a truth to that. It is true that the US military targets lower-class schools and impoverished schools, specifically making poverty-based arguments. It is not true that that leads to the majority of recruits. That's not true. The majority of recruits come from downwardly socially mobile, middle-class people. But there's a truth to that. And my response to this, or many people's response to this, which I think is well-meaning, but not as effective as, what I'm going to say, is it doesn't matter how much you need to feed your children, it never gives you a right to kill other people's children. Or what I have used, would you say that about any other terrorist group in the world? Would you say that about the IDF, ISIS? Because Israelis certainly do say that about the IDF. Oh, we're going to go to jail if we don't go to Gaza. Both of these reassert American exceptionalism. Why are you treating America different than other countries or other places? And the extreme nature of American crimes. It's good. It's a good argument. But I don't think they hit at the root of the problem, which is the archetypical apologetic military wife, who are people I've spoken to the most, could actually say, yeah, I do say that. I do try and understand everyone. And no, I don't think it's a justified move. I don't think my husband was justified in joining the military. But I just think you should be nice to them, because otherwise, how will we get them out? They aren't the problem, and we actually need to help them to get them out of the situation, or not threaten them to go further into it. And this is why I've started trying to move towards this response. If you really believed they were victims of that propaganda, me attacking the perpetrators of that propaganda, which may include them, would not bother you. Actually, you should go for it. You should be supportive of it. If this argument is coming in good faith to protect people not just currently in the military, but all people who might be susceptible to the pro-military propaganda out there, then me undermining it and using social tools that we have, like shame and ostracization and exposure of the war crimes, to undermine the glorification that military propaganda has, that cool factor, that sci-fi, oh, look at these huge military, arms and planes and tanks. My attempts to undermine those things would not be a concern. In fact, the reasonable response would be, wow, I'm so happy. Because if my husband had seen this when he was making the mistake of joining the military, maybe he wouldn't have made that mistake. I.e., if it is true that you believe military propaganda is something that is harmful because it is lying to people into joining the military, me correcting those lies should be pro-social. And better yet, not just caring about that one military member, because maybe she could say, look, even if he had known this, he still would have gone for the school or whatever. But you should say, better yet, decentering your victimized war criminal, your military husband, in the first place, and say, this may hurt my feelings, or may even hurt his feelings, or may even drive him further into the war criminal machine. But if it is effective in undermining recruitment, which I'm going to argue that it is later, that saves lives, and I'm for that. And if you're truly anti-imperial, that should be your goal. So that's my response to people who say, oh, will the poverty draft? I'm aware. I could talk about my history of my family in the military. I could talk about my history of my friends in the military. I understand. This doesn't come from necessarily a place of ignorance. It comes from a place of strategy. And this is my strategy as to, here's my positive argument for being mean to them effectively. Because, the US military, we aren't going to be able to take all their money. We aren't going to be able to take away the control they have over our economy. But TLDR, they care about looking cool. They care about being accepted in society. They care that when they come home, their mother will take them in their arms and thank them. They care that they get 5% off at the barbershop. And that we control. We can't control whether they're going to screw us over and take our education, but we can control if we give them 5% off at the barbershop. And we better fucking not. So yes, why do I care? What's the goal? What's the plan? In a deeply Israeli-esque arguments, I consistently hear from low-level military recruits who seem to be obsessed with my testosterone level, or worse, recruiters who seem to be deeply confused that I'm a homosexual, and when they find out, they suggest I go to the Navy. Whenever I call them out on glorifying the military, they say they're just doing their jobs. Just as Israelis glorifying Israel, who I confront about the war crimes they're normalizing, consistently remind us that the state of Israel will not stop its genocide merely because we comment a Palestinian flag on the post. Right? They speak the language of power. Soldiers in America keep reminding us that they'll continue doing their job, even if some random commenter they totally don't care about tells them that they're doing war crimes. And actually, in a very Democrat-esque way, they say, if you keep hating on us, then we'll just become worse. I don't know about those individuals. I can't speak to them. They might be right. But, if you're going to become a war criminal more because of internet comments, I think you're going to become a war criminal anyway. But what exactly is then my goal? My goal is to use the exact same levers that the empire is using to recruit people into an organization to prevent that recruitment. If you look at military advertisement, as I said, it is very clear that they are not just advertising that you can feed your children. This is something I want to ram into people's heads. They are very often advertising that you'll be cool. They certainly mention that you can feed your children. But most importantly, as is true with Israel trying to compel people to make Aliyah, Rhodesia trying to compel young white supremacists to join the Rhodesian Bush war, and army recruiters trying to recruit you to the Navy, they care about making you look cool. They care about bringing glory. They care about appealing to nationalism. And most importantly, they care about making you feel normal. Superior, but normal. Whether that looks like feeling successful, your mother will be so proud, or marrying or dating someone hot. They literally advertise how hot or controlling military wives are, or doing what you already had in you. Look at this Navy ad.
Deep down, you always knew you were different, that you had something
Oh my God, what do we do?
special.
These things matter. And I know they matter because PR for the military is telling you that they matter. And most importantly, these things are in our control. We can't stop them from spending on education. We can't stop them from making it so impossible to live in America that the only way some people see, rightly or wrongly, the only way they can live or even move up on the ladder is to go tear down other people in the Middle East. But we can control whether downwardly mobile middle-class people will feel accepted, tolerated, and even successful if they join the military. And that's why they're so sensitive to the internet comments. That's why Republicans lose their ever-loving mind when you stomp on the flag or don't salute a veteran. It is incredibly hard to convince someone to put their life on the line simply because they want money. But if your family will love you more, if your wife will be hotter, if you feel more complete and happy, yeah, maybe self-sacrifice is part of that. And maybe they convince you to go to Afghanistan. Not because you agree with the political justification for the war. Some parts of the military are that, but that's not enough. But if it can convince you that your interests are that the same as the nation, not just because you maybe agree or tolerate with the nation, but actually it's outside of politics. Actually, it's you'll feel proud. Then yeah, maybe you can do that. And if we elucidate to them as clearly as possible that the interests of the military are not the same as the interests of yourself. And importantly, if we materially change what those interests are, if we make damn well sure they know when they come back to their school, they will not be accepted by their alum. Make damn well sure that they know that when they post dance trends in their uniforms, they will not be met with, oh, how cute, but they will be met with, oh, how disgusting. Then we can do the direct inverse of what military propaganda is trying to convince them to do. And we are doing our jobs. So finally, to address more substantively the actual argument that people make, the possible risk. Now to the actual naysayers. The form of the argument that tends to come is, sure, you could say all this, but what actually ends up happening is you remove their ability for an off-ramp. And this is interesting, right? The basic argument, we don't want to ostracize them. We can't just not speak to them, because then how will they ever feel comfortable leaving and feeling apologetic? And first of all, I want you to recognize that that is reaffirming my argument. If there is a need for an off-ramp, that, like, the opportunity to leave later is literally sold to recruits, right? Like, they always say, oh, it's just 4 years, it's just 6 years. The fact that you can leave is an important part of being able to join. And if I talk about this with the IDF, if we shame the IDF into not being able to put the skills they learned building, weaponry that attacked Palestinians on their LinkedIn, then that off-ramp does go away. That's true. But so does the on-ramp that is its correlate. So that's me repeating my argument. Apologies, but I just want to contextualize this. But I also want to say, to this idea of an off-ramp, to this idea of denazification, de-radicalization, that is true interpersonally. It is understandable that if you think your friendship with someone in the military, in a neo-Nazi cult, in the IDF, can be leveraged to help them make a better decision, that is a form of legitimate harm reductive work that some in Antifa organizations do. It's especially true of familial relationships, right? If you can stop your brother from being a Nazi, or even if you have to do the labor of pulling him out of a Nazi cult, do that. But importantly, one of the tools that interpersonal relationships have is, hey, bro, if you don't leave that Nazi cult, if you don't leave the US military, my friends won't like me. You're hurting me, a person you care about. So there's actually an interplay between negative social pressure, negative political pressure, and effective, positive interpersonal pressure. And importantly, would you promote that publicly? Will you say that that's the only way to prevent Nazis? Or will you recognize that condemning and ostracizing them serves the purpose of not getting them into that situation in the first place? And to be cynical, although I think accurate, this often comes from a place of self-preservation more than pure logic. It's true of most people's politics, mine included very likely, where they are uncomfortable with the truth that they believe cognitively their husband is a war criminal comparable to the SS, so they twist and turn to find a permission structure that is plausible and that allows them to feel comfortable where they are. Classic cognitive dissonance. This is understandable, and I don't condemn it, but I also just have very limited time or patience to therapize people out of it. So that's my argument. Now, as I always do, what's to be done? As a great man once said, what is to be done? So what's my call to action? Don't salute veterans. Don't tolerate recruiters at your high school. Be vocally and publicly against them doing their job in any capacity, and make no concessions. Oh, Germany did not need an SS, not even a nice one. No, occupied Palestine does not need an IDF, not even a nice one. And no, the US empire does not need a military, not even a nicer one. We have some tools that the empire recognizes matter more than all the money they have: social, political, and familial pressure. It isn't everything, and we need to address the material tools they have as well: free education by providing cheaper education, feeding your children by providing mutual aid networks. We need to address that as well. But if we ignore the tools we have, we are not helping the victims of those levers. We are enabling the perpetrators. So that's why I hate the military, and that's why you should too, and importantly, how you should too. If you're like this, please give a like and a subscribe. I'm going to be making more of these. And thank you to everyone who follows me on Substack, especially to the patrons on Substack. If you want to follow me there, the link will be in my bio. Thank you.